I'm here in Pennsylvania, surrounded by about $50 million worth of technology on wheels. More than a dozen fracking trucks, each one probably costing $2 million. Each one of those trucks has 2,500 horsepower on a special hydraulic engine designed to pressurize that water a mile deep underground to 6,000 pounds a square inch. Big silos, almost everything here mobile. It's going to be taken away when the fracking is done in about a week. This steel alone, millions of bucks worth of pipes, it all comes in here in the manifold. The water, the sand, the fracking fluid, and goes down the hole more than a mile deep. Oh, there's 50 men here working around the clock. This place doesn't stop. And it's this place and dozens of other fracking locations, hundreds, that have made Pennsylvania a boom state again. Enjoy today's show as we take you into the heart of a frac job.
But first, what exactly is fracking? Well, it starts by drilling deep down into shale rock and then sideways for miles in a process known as horizontal drilling. The drill pipe and bit are removed. Layers of steel and cement are inserted to make sure the freshwater zone is protected. So the well is drilled. Now it's time to frack it, making tiny cracks, most as small as a grain of sand. A perforation gun is lowered into the very end of the well. An electric current sets off a charge that punctures the metal casing and cement. Extreme pressure is pumped down with water, sand, and chemicals into the well and forced out through those small perforations. This pressure causes the shale rock to fracture and release gas, which will flow through the production line for years. A small plug isolates that perforated section of the well, and the next part of the well is ready to be perforated and fracked. This process of perfing and fracking continues several times for the entire horizontal distance of the well. Once the fracking is completed, the plugs are drilled out to allow the gas to flow through the production line for you and I to use for decades. The whole fracking process, only a couple of weeks total. We were surrounded by all different types of heavy equipment, but what exactly is it all for? We went right into the fracking site, the fracking pad they call it, to get each different part of the process explained. One thing was clear, from remotely controlled valves to extra precautions with the workers, safety was their #1 concern.
You'll see here, this is our manifold where all the high pressure pumps dump into, and we have remotely actuated valves, which is, you see that yellow open and close tag? Yeah. So that you could visually verify that the valve is open and closed from a distance. But there's an actuator on the top, hydraulically powered, and it'll spin and it'll actually open and close that valve. This is the blender. So we have sand that comes out of the silos into a hopper here, and it's augured up into this, we call this the tub, and that's where we mix the water and sand together. And there's a big paddle in there, and it spins around, mixes the sand and water, and goes out the bottom of the tub into another pump. The pump pumps it into this manifold, and this manifold feeds all the frac pumps.
There can be anywhere from 20 to 50 workers on the site, 24 hours a day. But what exactly are each of their roles?
Everybody has specific jobs that in specific times. And so once we shut down, everybody knows to go here or there, fill up, rig up.
Now there's a guy with a vacuum cleaner. He's vacuuming up some water. Is that what that is?
Yeah. Any little spill, any kind of water, rainwater, anything that gets on this containment, it's all sucked up to a vacuum truck and taken and recycled.
Fracking trucks aren't your average trucks. These are some serious pieces of equipment that pump the water, sand, and fracking fluid deep into the wells to open up tiny cracks in the shale.
Every one of these pumps has remote pressure transducers, which is just like an electronic pressure gauge. And we're recording the pressures on each and every single pump. We're recording engine temperature, RPM. We record hundreds of different channels of data, and they all flow through these cords into our van over there. So we have a whole electronics department that comes and hooks all this stuff up so that when you click the mouse, the pump that you want to turn on turns on. This is a 2,500 horsepower engine, and it goes into this transmission here, and the transmission and the engine both are controlled electronically from the van with the computer, or you can come out here and control them manually.
So this is, you could operate the truck right here,
yeah,
but that antenna is like a wireless. It takes orders from the control truck.
Yes, that's correct.
And what are this is just obviously...
These are just analog gauges. These are analog gauges of what's going on this pump right now, but these are also digitally recorded within the van.
So that's a big monster engine.
Yeah.
And these are the fuel tanks. So this is not fuel to drive the truck. That's fuel to run that engine. It's got its own fuel tank to drive it.
That's correct.
That is a bloody big engine. That's like a train engine.
It's huge. It's definitely a big engine. And to think that we have 14 of them out here, that's what it takes to pump that water down the well, it's pretty remarkable.
But what is even more remarkable is how these trucks are controlled.
When I was a kid, a fracking van, you know, that was a little van that had a sign of this van's a rockin', don't come a knockin'. But I'm all grown up now, and a fracking van is this. It's the command post, sort of the high-tech mission control that controls all the heavy equipment on site. Let's go in and take a look. So you got 2, 4, 6, 8 different screens. One of them's a visual image. Tell me what's on the screen.
We're watching our wellhead pressure, you know, watching our pump rate. Pretty much the best way to say the vitals of the well. What's going on? Our treating pressures. Anything else that we're running to help you know, treat the well out. And they're just keeping track of all that stuff right there. So at any moment, if we need to make a change in the job, they can go ahead and make the call out to the guys on the ground and, you know, make changes as needed. The other thing that we watch is our sand rate too, because we're, you know, pumping sand into the well, so they can go ahead and track everything as well. On this screen to your far left right here, the one on the bottom left right over there, that's where they're actually controlling the pumps. They can actually control everything from here, the RPMs, the gears.
How deep is this well? I mean, can you explain some of these numbers there?
Right now our treating pressure at surface is almost 6,200 psi. Then we also have the number to the right of it, that is our bottom hole pressure, 8,400 psi. You know, we have some hydrostatic, we have you know, some forces pushing down, so it's going to be a little bit higher bottom hole. And then you can see over here on the screen in front of Wendell, he's got a little bit more accurate count of, you know, what's in the pipe, the density of the sand, and the sand total. Right now we have 227,000 pounds of sand right now in the well. And then the depth right now, we're getting a little bit you know, closer to the end of the job, so we're working uphole a little bit.
So that backwards J there, that yellow, that's the actual shape of the pipe?
Yes, sir. That's sir. It's a replica of the well. That's not actually the exact shape of the well, but it's just something that's a guide that whenever we stage our sand, we'll know when the sand is hitting our purse.
So that's 7,717 feet deep. Am I reading that right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
So we're getting close to the end of the job, but depending on how far we drill, I mean, we could be starting out like at 11,000 measured depth because, you know, we have, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 foot lateral.
So you're going sort of from the toe to the heel of the,
correct.
Of the well? So I see how much sand we're using. Almost 250,000 pounds of sand. And how much water would you be using to dissolve that?
It varies, but in one stage we could be like around 100,000 barrels, you know, give or take. It just depends on, you know, the job. The engineers, you know, create the job, and they could vary. But off the top of my head, it's around 100,000 barrels. You know, Dennis can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's
8,000 a stage.
Okay, 8,000 a stage. That's a better way to put it.
So right now we're pumping 67.2 barrels of water out of those vertical tanks over there down the well, and you can see that's represented by this blue line. And then we'll mix sand with the water, and the amount of the volume actually increases. So we're pumping 70 barrels of sand and water, but 67 barrels of just water. Does that make sense? Because the sand is taking up some of that volume.
So that graph there is simply over time how these numbers vary. That's the same information.
This is real time, and then this is just a graphical representation and a record of all these real time numbers.
So for example, 70 minutes into the job, something changed. What would that change?
This is how much sand that we're pumping. We're charting the pounds of sand added per gallon of water. So right now, for every gallon of water, we're adding 1 pound of sand. And so that's represented by this line here. And so you'll see that we started out maybe at a 1/4 pound of sand, then a 1/2 pound. Now we're at 1 pound of sand per gallon. And so all these things affect pressures, and that's what these guys are doing. They're monitoring the pressures and the effects of the sand and other things. So as you can see, that this red line here is the pressure, and you'll see little fluctuations in pressure as the job goes on. And that's kind of dependent on the flow rate of the water that we're pumping down and other stuff that related to the formation.
So right now, you're putting it at tremendous pressure, water, sand,
Now we're putting, those pumps are producing 6,300 pounds per square inch. And that's the amount of pressure that it takes to force 70 barrels a minute of water and sand into the Marcellus.
So you're forcing the water and the sand into to create little cracks and prop them open, and you're moving back by your plugging as you're going from the toe to the heel. Is that right?
Yes. So
And
the water is actually separating the rock. It's actually making the fracture. And the sand, when the water kind of leaks off, the rock tries to close up again, but the sand prevents it from coming all the way close, so it leaves a void space where the gas can travel through that void space, through the fracture, into the wellbore up to the surface. So
I
right
see
now,
there's a purple line.
he went from 1 pound of sand per gallon of water to 1.25 pounds of sand per gallon. So now that increased concentration, we're tracking it in real time as it moves down the well. So what he's going to do, he's going to be able to watch. So since he made an adjustment, he's going to watch the effects of that adjustment and then make a decision based on maybe a pressure signal or something like that.
So that purple line moving down is the new density of sand that was chosen. Do you mind if I ask you, just out of curiosity, why did you make that decision?
It's based off of the pump design that's given to us by the engineers. We follow this pump design verbatim.
We're merely executing that engineered plan that's been based on highly technical models, studying offset wells in the area and understanding prior performance of offset wells, and also looking at analog fields in the industry as a whole.
This may all seem so complicated, but for the guys here, it's just one of thousands of frac jobs they've worked on.
Do you mind if I ask you how many frac jobs have you done in your career?
Oh, wow, I don't have any idea how many I've done.
Would it be hundreds or thousands? You do them every day pretty much?
And, maybe close to thousands.
And are you from Pennsylvania originally or from Texas?
Texas.
How's the Marcellus Shale, how's Pennsylvania fracking technically in terms of, you know, the success of them? Can you compare Pennsylvania to Texas?
The main difference is the pressures. I mean, the treating pressures are a lot higher here than they are in the Barnett in Texas, the formation that I've worked in Texas.
How long have you been in the fracking business?
Probably 10 years.
What's in them? Is that fracking? Let me ask you about that big old crane.
We've just scratched the surface at the frac pad. I still had so much to learn. Stay with us as we go in deep on our fracking special. We're going into the heart of a frac job, and as we showed you before the break, it's no easy job.
About 50 men and women work on a frac pad when it's being fracked. Everyone has their different role. It's like an orchestra, and they all have to work together for safety and obviously efficiency. They work around the clock, 2 12-hour shifts a day. They don't take any downtime. They keep the fracking going. There's a lot of heavy equipment. Each of those trucks, more than $1 million, $2 million, pumping at 2,500 horsepower, blending water and sand and other fracking fluid, and all controlled. I want to show you some more of the amazing equipment, including the actual, they call it a gun, the device that's lowered more than a mile down, and when it's deep underground, fractures with a little charge, creates a hole in the pipe through which the frac fluid is pumped. It's amazing technology. Enough talk. Let me show you. Let's talk about the pad itself first. It's surrounded by a big, sort of a dry moat, so to speak, eh?
Yeah, the pad size itself is about 3 to 325 feet by 325 feet, and it is our working location both early on as we drill and complete the wells, and later on in life once we produce the wells as well.
So we're standing on what looks like normal ground, but there's actually layers of containment there in case there would be some spill. Am I right? What's underneath us for a few feet?
Yeah, over my shoulder basically we have a layer of containment that covers all of the working equipment on this location. So all of the pumping trucks, all of the tanks, hoses, wellheads that you see here is surrounded by containment and also a bermed environment so that if a hydraulic hose were to leak or anything mechanically were to fail, we have an easy ability to clean that up and dispose of everything properly and not have it get on the soil.
Now let's start here with these 3 big red tankers. Is that water in there?
That's correct. We store water in here for our operations, along with the silver tanks that you see behind us that are the vertical uprights in the background. Each one of them holds about 450 barrels, and we have 6 of them on the backside and 3 here in the front.
And all those green machines, those are the pumping trucks. Those big towers back there, the ones that look about, I don't know, 100 feet high almost. How tall are those and what's in them?
Yeah, those silos are basically for our sand storage for the frac jobs. We switched to those about a year ago. It's a much smaller footprint for us out here, and with the trucks that we have coming in and out, it makes things much safer, logistically easier to manage. But these silos also reduce the amount of sand particulate that we have in the air on all of our sites. So we switched to that about a year ago and real pleased with the results.
All right, so we've got 3 wellheads. Is that what we would call those wellheads?
That's correct. Each one of those represents a Marcellus well that was drilled several months ago that we're getting ready to complete.
Now, we were just in the control room looking at one frac job. Which one of these wells is being fracked, or is it that one over there?
Actually, it's the one at the very front of the location there that you see.
Okay, so imagine 1.5 miles down, and then that's sort of going out laterally. Are all these 3 going out in different directions?
They are. There's each one of them goes in a different direction. Some of them will be parallel to one another. Some of them could be opposite directions of each other. But preferentially, they'll be drilled to the northwest and southeast.
Do they go to different depths, or are you going to the same sweet spot, so to speak?
Same sweet spot, because we hope to extract these minerals responsibly. The length of the lateral may change depending upon the boundaries of our leases that we have, but the depth should be real consistent.
Got it. So when you're going deep down and then out, sort of from the heel to the toe, you can only go as far to the toe as you've got lease rights. Am I correct?
That is correct. I would say there's probably 2 limiting factors for us. One is the technical limits of drilling longer and completing these wells. And the other would be, of course, what you have leases that will hold that wellbore.
So you couldn't sneak under someone else's land like a bendy straw. You'd have to get their rights all the way out.
Absolutely correct.
So this well pad here, you're paying lease payments, could be to folks hundreds of yards, maybe even 1 mile out. Like how far is the heel to the toe? How far horizontally are you going out from here?
It's not uncommon for us to drill a couple of miles, anywhere from 1 mile to 2 miles in lateral length.
Water, sand, fracking fluid are all mixed together in what's aptly called a blender.
All it does is it's just as the name insinuates. It blends our chemicals, our water, and our sand on location, and it discharges it into that manifold that's aimed right toward us. And then the pumping equipment pushes it right into that wellbore.
So what percentage would it be water, sand, and then fracking fluid?
Really good question. Really, water makes up the majority of what we do, and chemicals are less than 1% of what we apply, and sand is also a small percent from a volumetric perspective. So water is clearly our big consumer here on location.
And where do you get the water from? Do you use groundwater? Is it fresh water? Do you recycle your water? Where does that come from?
We have multiple sources that we use. We have permitted sources from nearby lakes, rivers, streams, so we utilize as many as we can. But our big use is the recycled water. A couple of years ago, we moved toward a 100% recycling program. So we produce anywhere from 10 to 15,000 barrels a day of produced water in this field, and we reuse all of it in our fracturing operations.
So produced water, that's water that you use to frack, that when the cracks are made, the water comes back up. You already used it to frack once, but then you catch it and you use it again. Am I getting that right?
That's absolutely correct. These wells will continue to make a small amount of water on a daily basis throughout their producing history. We capture that water in those green tanks you see over the pumping equipment. That's going to be part of our permanent production facility. And so for the next several years, we'll capture water there and we'll haul it to the future fracking sites.
Let me ask you about that big old crane. What's that crane about? What's it holding up? And what's it over? Is that another wellhead there? What's going on with the crane?
Actually, there is a fourth wellhead over to the side of us. That crane actually helps us conduct the next phase after a frac job. Once a frac is completed, we basically will run in with what's called wire line. It's the cable that you see hanging there, and that allows us to set a bridge plug that in the wellbore that isolates the prior frac and allows us to perforate new holes in the pipe where we're going to place the next frac. So that wire line becomes the conduit that allows us to do that operation.
So what happens when all this equipment goes away? What comes out of the wells?
This is actually a very liquids-rich portion of the field for us, where we make basically NGLs, or natural gas liquids. We make natural gas, and we also make condensate here on this location once it starts producing.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm getting this, because I got my high school chemistry, that's all I know. So you frack it, you plug it, all this stuff moves away, but the gas and the other natural gas liquids have not come out of the well yet. It's sort of plugged. It's not until you drill it again to drill through those plugs that the oil and gas and other things is produced. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct.
What's this?
Okay, so this is actually just a remote closing unit. When we have valves and other equipment that needs to be operated, we basically use this in the event that there was a failure of the primary closing mechanism. That would be our secondary system that we would use to operate valves.
So we've covered some of the equipment, but there's so much more to the frac pad once we walked around.
We have 14 pump trucks out here that range in 2,000 to 2,500 horsepower on each unit, and they're what's pumping the job today.
So the trucks are parked here, and the drivers sort of go home because it's just the pumps on the back that they're used for, obviously, until it's time to take them away, right?
That's correct. Once these pump trucks are brought into location and they're rigged up to pump the job, there's actually a communication system that ties back to the treating van. And so at that point, they really don't need a worker per unit at that point. They can actually operate the equipment inside the treating center.
So this is another view of the sand silos. So these sand trucks keep on coming in and loading up those silos, and then that goes through the blender with the water and the fracking fluid, and these trucks pump it down. I got that right?
That's correct. And that configuration of silos will hold somewhere around 2.5 million pounds of proppant for the jobs today.
It's an incredible thing. I mean, that's a lot of power going on. It's sort of like blowing through a 2-mile-long hose, and at the other end, it's 6,000 pounds per square inch. That's a hell of a lot of pressure.
It is, but it's also very manageable here. So something that's done an awful lot in this industry. The equipment has a lot of design and runtime history behind it. So what you see here is very reliable, and actually it does a great job.
Now, let's walk a bit, because this dark green stuff here behind it, you say when all the fracking is done, when all these trucks go, obviously there's going to be a small facility left here to get the good stuff out of the ground. Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. If you look over to the right on that hillside, you'll actually see a pipeline right away. That's where the pipeline's going to come into location, and then straight ahead we actually have our sales header. So gas, when it starts to produce and all this equipment leaves, will come right through this dark green equipment. It's called our permanent facility, and the gas will go right down that buried pipeline, and we'll have that right away reclaimed, and it'll look like the rest of the countryside here.
We've been showing you the incredible process of a fracking job. Frac trucks that have enough power to force sand, water, and fracking fluid into the rock. We've shown you the command truck where all this equipment is controlled from. And we've shown you what's called a perf gun that blows small holes into the well pipe so that gas can come into it. As you can see, there's a lot going on here. But is it safe?
We know it's safe for the communities. As Lisa Jackson, Obama's first appointee to the head of the EPA, said, there hasn't been a single case of water contamination ever proved in the 60-plus years that fracking has been going on. But how about for the workers themselves, the people on site? What safety steps are taken for them and the environment right there? Take a look. I want to talk about this really thick liner. It's like a really heavy vinyl, and I can see there's something woven in it. It's under the whole site. It's under the trucks. It's under all this drilling stuff. Tell me about this.
Yeah, what we have here is underneath our entire working surface that we have here, we have a 30 to 40 mil liner that we basically use as containment. We berm up the edges. It's textured on the surface so that we basically have a safe work surface, and we prevent against any slips, hopefully. But this allows, in case we have a failure in a hydraulic hose or any kind of spill or anything that comes out of a line as we're breaking connections on location, it allows us to keep all of that right here on the work surface. It allows us to quickly clean it up, suck up any fluids that we might have, and dispose of it properly.
I saw a guy just vacuuming up water. I sort of surprised me that you have a water vacuum.
Absolutely. We keep a couple of trucks out here and personnel 24 hours a day. So we have a couple of different crews, and part of their role is to make sure that when we have fluid that gets on the containment, that we suck it up accordingly, again, keeping the work surface clean and safe. I
got to tell you, it's not just clean, it's spotless. There's not one piece of litter around here. Like it's a real emphasis. That's probably not just for aesthetics. That's probably for safety and environmental reasons too.
It is. Really, safety and housekeeping, it's a core value for us here at Range. And so we take it very seriously. We want to make sure that we have a lot of pride in what we do here. So we keep the work site safe, we keep it clean, we keep it free of debris, any fluid. And I've been doing this 17 years, and this is as good of a job as I've ever seen us do in the industry, just kind of staying out in front of challenges like this. We have the rig mats here on location that you see.
So these things, what's this surface? That's on top of the liner. That's for like the heavy equipment to go on, eh?
Yeah, any of the high impact areas where you see the treating iron, we lay these thick rubber rig mats underneath it. They're locking together, so it allows us to basically protect the containment so that it'll do its job. If you put any of this vibrating and moving parts and pieces, trucks on top of this plastic, it doesn't take long before you start to wear a hole in something. So this allows us to really protect any of the high impact areas so that we can let the containment do its job.
Tell me about a couple other safety features that maybe aren't so obvious. I mean, those things that look like tethers there, those cloth tethers, that's Kevlar, isn't it?
It is. Those are restraints that we put on our treating iron. That way, if there were ever to be a part in any of the iron, we pressure test it before the jobs are executed to ensure for safety, but it's just to make sure that it all stays attached to the wellhead and everything is secured.
So if there was some blowout, that Kevlar, that's bulletproof fabric really, that would hold things together so it doesn't go flying.
That's correct. It would keep it secured to the well and right here on location.
What other safety thing? I mean, when they were bringing this wire line down, there was a light on and the fella said turn off all radios. Tell me more about what other safety things are here that might not be evident.
Well, we adhere to a dual barrier policy here, but if you'll look at that wellhead, we actually have several barriers between us and our presser. So we have our wireline BOP on top as a primary, and then we also have 3 master valves on that wellhead, with the very top being hydraulic actuated from a remote location so that we don't have to have people near the wellhead unless we absolutely have to.
Now put that in plain English for me. You got 3 or 4 things there, and what are those things? Do you use a lot of fancy pants words? Dumb it down for a guy like me. When would those safety things kick in? What would those valves and things do? What are they designed to stop?
They're really designed to basically stop pressure and flow of a well. So anytime we would work on the well, we would shut those valves to make sure that it's safe for the workers at the surface. In the event that there were some sort of failure, we would be able to then shut in that well and close off any flow to surface by shutting in those wells, by closing those valves.
And what you're saying is there's 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of redundancy there.
Absolutely, 4 levels.
So the idea of this like 1890s California gusher kind of thing, or whenever that was, 1910, that just doesn't happen anymore.
Absolutely not. We have such a low frequency of failures, and it's because of the multiple layers of redundancy that we have here and the safeguards that we put in place to make sure the location's safe.
I'm wearing a hard hat. I feel safer just, from myself really, bumping into stuff. Is there safety training for everyone who comes on here? I mean, we had to go through a little bit of a read through and whatnot. What kind of safety training would the guys have at work here?
Anyone who comes on a site will go through some preliminary safety training, understanding our expectations, understanding the company that they work for's expectation. As you can see from the logos on the equipment, there's several companies being represented here today. But safety is an ongoing portion of what we do. So there will be training throughout the year, both from our standpoint and also from their standpoint, whether it's around how to prevent slips, trips, and falls, proper lifting techniques. That safety training is embedded in the culture of these organizations year-round.
We've been showing you how to frac or hydraulically fracture a well a mile and a bit underground.
We went right into a frac site and got up close to the massive fracking trucks that generate enough power to push the fracking fluid, water, and sand to the very end of the well and fracture the rock. We went inside the fracking van when the entire operation is controlled, and we saw the endless amount of sand trucks that come to replenish the supply.
But before you can frac a geological formation, you have to drill down to it. Well, just a couple of miles away, they were drilling one. Let me show you what that's like, and interestingly, all the steps they take, steel and concrete, to keep the water table safe from their oil and gas work.
This is what we call a triple rig because there's 3 pieces of the drill pipe that's in the stack. This was a drilling rig that was specially designed for Appalachia, so it breaks down into more pieces so it can be trucked in and out. This rig might be here for a month or 2, depending on the number of wells that we're drilling. And you'll also notice at the bottom those little orange stompers. Those are feet. So believe it or not, this rig will get up and walk like a space shuttle from wellbore to wellbore. So that's exactly what's going on now. Think of drilling as like paving the road to the target. So this is what this is doing now is the horizontal portion of the wellbore. So it's a slow, gradual. Everyone always says, how do you get the wellbore to turn? Is it like a sharp 90-degree turn? It's not. It's a 1-degree bend. It takes place over several hundred feet before that wellbore goes horizontally through the shale.
So this went down, and now it's going over from the heel to the toe.
Yeah, that's correct. So at this point, this is probably 1.5 miles beneath our feet right now, and it might be half a mile over underneath another hillside and then travel out another mile or so. So total depth that these wells may travel is several miles starting right here.
Now, here, obviously you give a few tours. This is this actual steel pipe and actual cement that you use?
What you see are several concentric circles of steel that's fully encased in that cement until you get down into that 5.5-inch string. So if most people can relate, you know, you have a smartphone in your pocket. You couldn't drop that phone down the wellbore width-wise. It's that small of a hole. But it starts off, you know, you can almost fit your body from that original circle.
Now, all the way down, or is it this thick only near the top?
Well, here's the most important thing. This is ultimately what it looks like when it's going through the water table. That's really what everyone's concerned with. Are you protecting groundwater? These are all the strings, and they all have to be tested. It's all a special oil field cement that goes into it to make sure that groundwater's protected. By the time you're down near the shale, you might just have that one last string, but it's always fully cemented back to surface.
All right, so you're going through the water table 50, 100 feet deep. Is the outer level cement or is it steel?
Cement. Yeah.
So you got cement and then steel and then cement and steel and cement and steel and cement and steel and cement and steel. So when your fracking fluid and your water and your sand goes down, is it going only in here?
Yeah, that's correct. Think of it starts in the beginning. These are all concentric circles that fully isolate that. Some of these strings you might set like the 13 3/8. That's just to isolate coal zones. So there's a mining seam that runs through southwestern Pennsylvania. That's what this is helping to isolate. This is known as the intermediate, and then finally your production string.
And is this just to keep it safe or strong, or is there any other purpose for it?
Well, look, we don't want the gas going anywhere except for into a sales line, and we don't want water going anywhere except for in the groundwater. So this is ultimately to protect and isolate that and to make sure that we can have production for many, many years into the future. Now, when the fracking takes place, they'll drop down, they'll put what's called a perforation device down here, and it'll actually blow small quarter-sized holes through this steel and through that concrete.
And that's when it's way down deep.
1.5 miles deep.
When it's in the middle of the shale.
Right, exactly. Right into the shale to start that initial
And obviously, is that surrounded by cement when it's perforated?
Yeah, that's correct. It's fully cemented back to the surface. It's a special specialty steel that we use, and also special oil grade cement. So it basically hardens faster and can withstand the type of work that we do. What's also important is Throughout this process, you're testing it. You're getting just as much science that goes into the subsurface research. It's second only to NASA, and in many ways the space program borrows technologies from our industry. So as much technology that goes into understanding that subsurface also goes into making sure you have proper wellbore construction and integrity, and then that same kind of science and technology goes into the fracking operations as well.
I still couldn't wrap my head around how the pipe curves deep underground in horizontal drilling. It's like a bendy straw, but made out of steel and a mile deep.
It's not an abrupt turn, it's a gradual turn. So if you look down at this pipe, you'll see there's a small, basically a 1-degree bend at the end of this pipe. And there's a series of downhole communications devices and technology that talk back to the driller at the surface. And they're able to turn this any which direction that they want in order to build that wellbore exactly the way they want. And to show you how precise that technology is, imagine if you took a basketball, if you buried it 2 miles down from our feet and 2 miles in any direction, the drillers could hit it. It's that precise through that drilling process, and it's really with this specialty piece of technology, very expensive piece of technology, that allows all that to happen. And that's really that's the game breaker. As important as hydraulic fracturing is, horizontal drilling is an equal part importance in what's unlocked all this new oil and gas. What we're seeing now is what we call production.
That's a producing well, but you wouldn't know it by the tiny environmental footprint. After the break, we show you what happens when the trucks leave and the gas starts flowing.
We showed you what it looks like to drill into natural gas shale. We showed you what it looks like to frack it. The frac site we were on had 3 different wells, each of which was being fracked. But what happens after a few weeks when all those trucks are gone, the crane is gone, and the thing is reclaimed? What does it look like for the next 10, 20, 30 years, quietly pumping away and paying royalties to landowners? We went to a reclaimed site. Here's what it looks like. So this is a frac site that literally the trucks just left, the machines were broken down, and it's producing oil, gas, condensate, all these good things.
Yeah, that's right. This was a location, so we just finished flowing back the well, which is something that happens after we fracture the wells.
That's taking out the produced water, the water used, is that what it means?
Yeah, exactly. So we pumped water into that well at one point, and then you flow it back. So that water comes back through a closed-loop system at the surface, and we recycle and reuse that water. What we're seeing now is what we call production. So these wells are making gas. The condensate could be in the vehicles that we drove in. The natural gas could be in our homes right now, and what the crews are doing right now is they're starting the process of what we call reclamation. So they're putting the location back to the way it was before we started.
Now they're going to maintain a pad here for access to all these valves, and what's in those dark green cylinders there? We saw those at the other frac job.
Right. So what you have is it starts off, there's well heads. That's right where the drilling rig was. That's where the frac crews were hooked up to. And then underground, those gas wells go to what we call separators, and it separates the gas from. Some of that water comes back slowly over time, and then we also get what we call condensate. That's like a natural gasoline, and that's what's stored in those green tanks.
The reclaimed site may look simple and sparse, but there's still some high technology happening here.
This entire location is remotely controlled. So there's a lot of high technology that goes on. Believe it or not, about 20 miles from where we are right now, there's a crew that's sitting there in a control room, and they can control these wells from sitting behind a computer with a couple of clicks of a mouse.
Now the other site, we learned about the horizontal drilling, how it goes deep, and then it goes out like a foot on a leg. So this area here could be producing gas and condensate from that farm there, that house there. Like it could be a mile away. It's all being brought up here, is that right?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what happens. So we produce oil or natural gas from about 1 to 2 square miles, depending on a number of factors. And while you do see there's clearly a surface impact here, we can produce that 1 to 2 square miles with only having 1% impact on the surface. So this is dramatically reducing surface impact. So there's really no form of energy in the world that can produce as much energy with as
little impact on the surfaces.
So back in the day, before fracking, before directional drilling, you would have had 40 little pump jacks all around here, dotting the landscape, doing the same as this one pad does using horizontal drilling.
Well, yes and no, because even, you know, those wells still could have been fracked, and they may have even had some directional drilling, but it's really the combination of those two in shale. But for lack of a better expression, in the not too distant past, there would have literally been, you know, it would have been smaller than this, but potentially 20 or 30 of them, you know, pretty much on every single hillside. Now we don't see that. And you can look behind me, you can see there's gas being produced from literally as far as the eye can see.
There you have it, fracking before, during, and after. It's amazing to see high tech and hard work. I've enjoyed my time down here in Pennsylvania. I want to leave you with one little tidbit. You know, I enjoyed this visit to fracking. I learned a lot. Josh Fox, the anti-fracking extremist, he's made 3 anti-fracking movies since 2010. You know what? He has never actually set foot on a frac pad. I wonder why. I'm Ezra Levant for The Source. Bye-bye.